Once upon a time, in a neat little village where all the houses looked like they had been drawn with crayons, there lived a boy named Oliver Oddbody. Oliver was 7, had round red cheeks, button eyes, and an adorable smile. Oliver woke before dawn most mornings, with a kind of quiet excitement usually reserved for birthdays. His room was painted with cheerful clouds and smiling moons, but on the floor, beside his socks, there was always something wrapped in a heavy tea towel. Oliver called these his little learners, and he recorded each one in a neat notebook only he ever saw. That morning, Oliver woke up to see the towel-wrapped bundle slowly trembling. Inside was a spaniel puppy, soft, frightened, and easy to carry. Oliver lifted it with a careful tenderness that never made sense once people understood what he liked to do. He placed it in his cartoon lunchbox, secured the latch, and tiptoed down the stairs while his mother slept the sleep of someone too exhausted to notice anything around her. Outside, the village sat under a blanket of fog, the kind that softened every shape. Oliver walked to the allotments, where wooden sheds sat in crooked rows. Shed number 14 was his private place, a space once used by his father for gardening, but now transformed into what Oliver called the learning house. Inside, neat rows of jars lined the shelves. Each held reminders of past lessons: beetles, frogs, small birds. Larger notes were pinned above the desk, written with a child's perfect handwriting. Cats, difficult to keep calm. Fox cub, too noisy. Badger, do not repeat. On the center table sat the remains of Misty, the neighbor's cat. Misty had shown him things about joints and movement, and the precise point where movement stopped forever. Oliver observed her the way a child might observe a failed craft project, not with sadness, but with a sense of adjustments needed. He set the puppy on the table. It shook uncontrollably at first, then less, then not at all as Oliver worked. He used scissors, tape, and tools far too heavy for a child to own. His movements were small, deliberate, practiced. He hummed a nursery rhyme under his breath, while the fog outside swallowed all sound that might have escaped. The puppy lasted 8 minutes. Oliver wrote this in his notebook with mild disappointment, noting the softness of its frame and the flaw in his plan. He made a reference to trying something larger next time. His thoughts drifted to a strong black dog from further down the street. That one, he believed, would teach him more. He cleaned everything when he finished. His routine was precise: wiping the table, washing tools, folding towels, tying the bin bag tight. When he was done, the shed looked perfectly ordinary again. The fog had thinned by the time he walked home, and the birds began their morning songs. They scattered quickly when he passed. Oliver didn't notice. He was already thinking about tomorrow. His mother was in the kitchen, tired, distracted, unaware of anything unusual. She never noticed the faint smear on his sleeve or the smell clinging to him. He washed his hands for the exact number of seconds his teacher once recommended, a habit he enjoyed for its simplicity. Upstairs, he sat on his bed and opened the notebook again. Beneath the entry for the puppy, he wrote the name of the large black dog from 3 houses down. He imagined how it might teach him the balance he needed for his largest project. A final page in the notebook remained blank, set aside with care. At the top was a name he had written long before any of the animals, a name he had circled again and again: Mum. Oliver tapped the page with his pencil, amused by the thought of how long she might last once he understood everything he needed to know. The storybooks on his shelf always said bedtime stories ended with happily ever after. Oliver liked the idea of an ending. He just preferred to decide it himself. Little Sally had a garden, neat and trim and green, the prettiest little garden that anyone had seen. Her brother Tommy teased her. He pulled her golden hair. So Sally took the pruning shears and caught him on the stair. The blood made puddles on the floor. His fingers twitched and curled. She dragged him by his broken arm into her garden world. The shovel cut through flesh and bone. The lime burned at his face, and Tommy screamed beneath the dirt in his new resting place. Next came little Jenny, who laughed at Sally's dress. Sally held her under water in the bird bath, more or less. Her lungs filled up with algae. Her eyes went cold and wide. The compost heap received her, with her mouth still open wide. The mailman lost his footing. The rake went through his throat. He gurgled as he drowned in red and made a funny note. Sally's mother questioned the smell beneath the roses. So Sally showed her with the axe what happens when one noses. The garden bloomed more beautiful, fed on bone and meat, and Sally kept on planting everyone she'd meet. The flowers grew on marrow, the vines on rotting flesh, and Sally won first prize for blooms so bright and fresh. In a little yellow house at the end of Maple Street, there lived two children named Penny and Thomas. Penny was 8 years old, with copper-colored braids that her mother wove each morning, and she loved to collect smooth stones from the garden. Thomas was 6, small for his age, with a gap between his front teeth and a habit of humming while he colored. They were good children who said please and thank you, who fed the neighbor's cat through the fence, who had never spent a night afraid in their own home. Their mother and father were going to a very important dinner party, and a babysitter named Miss Miriam was coming to watch them for the evening. The children had never met Miss Miriam before. Their usual babysitter, Mrs. Chen from next door, had moved away the month before, and Miss Miriam had been recommended by someone at their father's office, though he could not quite remember who. Miss Miriam arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. She had pale skin and thin fingers that moved like spider legs when she waved goodbye to the parents' car. The children watched from the window as the taillights disappeared around the corner. And when they turned around, Miss Miriam was standing much closer than she had been before. She told them it was time for bed, even though the sun had barely set. Penny protested that their usual bedtime was 9 o'clock, but Miss Miriam's smile grew wider, and she said that good children go to bed when they are told. Her teeth seemed too numerous in her mouth. Thomas went first up the creaking stairs. Miss Miriam followed so closely behind that he could feel her cold breath on his neck. She tucked him into bed with hands that gripped too tightly, smoothing the blankets down until they felt like a straitjacket. Then she turned off the light and closed the door, and Thomas heard something he had never heard before: the sound of a lock clicking from the outside. Penny's room was next. Miss Miriam hummed a tune without melody as she pulled the curtains closed, not just drawing them, but fastening them with pins she produced from her pocket. She checked under the bed, but not the way parents do to show there are no monsters. She checked the way someone might look for a hiding space they planned to use later. When she tucked Penny in, her fingers lingered on the child's forehead, feeling her pulse, counting something under her breath. The house grew colder as the hours passed. Thomas lay awake in his locked room and heard Miss Miriam moving through the hallway. Her footsteps were wrong somehow, too light, or too many of them. He heard her open the linen closet, heard the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. He heard her in the bathroom, running water that went on, and underneath it, the sound of her still humming that terrible melody. At midnight, Thomas heard his sister's doorknob rattle. He pressed his ear against his own door and heard Penny's voice, small and frightened, asking what Miss Miriam was doing. The babysitter's reply was soft and gentle, explaining that she just needed to borrow something, just a little something, and it would only hurt for a moment. Thomas screamed and pounded on his door. He threw himself against it until his shoulder ached. The house seemed to swallow his cries. Eventually, Penny's room went quiet. The morning came slowly, reluctantly. Thomas heard his parents' car in the driveway, heard their key in the front door. He heard his father's voice calling up the stairs, heard his mother's footsteps quick on the floor. His door finally opened. They found Miss Miriam in the kitchen, having tea and reading the newspaper. She smiled her too wide smile and said the children had been absolutely perfect, not a peep from either of them all night. When the parents went upstairs to wake Penny and Thomas, they found both children in their beds, blankets pulled up to their chins. But Penny's eyes were different now, darker, older, and when she smiled at her parents, her teeth seemed too numerous in her mouth. Thomas tried to speak, tried to tell them what had happened, but no sound would come. His voice had been borrowed in the night, along with something else he could not name. He reached for his mother, but his hands felt cold and strange, his fingers moving like spider legs. Miss Miriam left through the front door at exactly 9 o'clock. She told the parents she would be happy to return any time they needed her services. After all, she said as she glanced back at the children standing in the doorway, she had found the family absolutely delightful. And that night, when the parents tucked their children into bed, they did not notice that Penny hummed a tune without melody, or that Thomas checked under the bed. Not the way children do when they are frightened, but the way someone might look for a hiding space they planned to use later.